Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf Mem Tet, final daf of Masechet Shevuot. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Very, very exciting to finish another Masechet. Really just highlighting again, as we do every time we finish a Masechet, how much one can accomplish if one does a little bit every day. So today we learn one of the shortest chapters in Talmud. Depending on how one counts Masechtot, like Tamid, etc., it might not actually technically be the shortest in terms of number of words, but it is, it is close to the shortest. And certainly when you add the fact that it does have some Gemara, it may very well be the shortest. Again, haven't gone through all of Shas, but yet. So as I continue to go through, maybe we'll find one that's shorter. But I think this is definitely among the shortest because it's a one daf parak. So, what does the parak discuss? Well, first of all, I'll note that the brevity is due in part because the topic of this chapter, the rules that apply to custodians, is discussed in greater detail elsewhere, particularly in Bava Metzia. It comes up here because earlier in Shevuot, we discussed a watcher who swears falsely and then admits to doing so. He's required to pay a 1/5 penalty and bring an ashram sacrifice. And again, of course, that's relevant to our Masechah because he's swearing. So having referenced that, we are going to discuss sort of all the even though it's going to be discussed elsewhere in greater detail, we're going to review in this opening Mishnah, which is the only Mishnah in the parak, and we long Mishnah. It's probably broken into several Mishnayos, if you look in a Sefer Mishnayos, that we're going to detail the rules that are associated with the different kinds of watchers and the oaths that they make, and whether the oaths that they make will, if it's false, will it constitute a false custodian oath? Will it constitute some other kind of false oath? Etc. That's what our chapter is going to discuss. So it fits very well here. Now, arguably, maybe we should have discussed this earlier because we have in the most recent chapters been discussing rabbinic oaths, and of course this is a biblical oath. But the Meiri apparently says that they moved it all to the end so that because it's so short and because it's being primarily discussed elsewhere. So as a result, that's why it may not be in its right place. But in any event, let's take a look and let's get started. So again, Mishnah begins by listing the four types of custodians and their rules. So Arba Shomer Hein. There are four kinds of custodians, kinds of watchers. Shomer Chinam, somebody who's an unpaid watcher. Hashoel, the borrower. Nosei Sachar, a renter. I'm sorry, a Nosei Sachar is a paid watcher. Hasocher, and the renter. So those are the four different categories. Shomer Chinam Nishba al Hakol. So now we're going to get the general rules as to sort of what their liability and requirement to swear is. So we say that an unpaid watcher has to swear regarding everything. What does that mean? Nishba al Hakol. Shalo Pasha, Rashi tells us second line in the Rashi in this last parak. It says that you're not into the third line that you're not negligent. You need to indicate that you're not negligent, and that's why you're not going to be liable. Because an unpaid watcher has the lowest level of liability. All they have to do is essentially swear that they weren't liable, that they didn't do something negligent, and then they will be off the hook. Shoel, on the other hand, a borrower, right, an unpaid watcher has the least liability because they have the most responsibility for the least remuneration. And because they're not getting paid, and yet they are watching and not benefiting. But when it comes to a borrower is in the opposite situation. A borrower is getting all the benefit, they're not paying anything. And so Hashoel Mishalim is a borrower pays for everything. And what do we mean by that? Mishalem es hakol, back into Rashi, third line. Now in the fourth line, kol hanach demitnu b'masnis, in every kind of situation that we are going to talk about in our Mishnah, like shever, if it breaks, shvuya, if it becomes captive, umesa, or if it dies of natural causes, ugeneva, if it's stolen, ve'aveda, and if it's lost, aval, mesa machmas malacha. But there is an exception. If it dies because of the work for which you had borrowed the animal, patur, then you're going to be exempt. Delav le'ukma b'kilta shaila, because you did not borrow the animal to just leave it in its enclosure. So as a result, that's going to be one exception, that if a borrower, if the animal dies doing what is expected of it, so then that's not the kind of situation that even a borrower would be liable. That is a totally expected, and so as a result, that they're not, that's not going to be on them. So no se sachar v'hasocher. What about the middle category? And now we're combining two different categories of custodians, which we'll talk about later in the Gemara, comparing two different categories of custodians, both a paid watcher and a renter. When it comes to them, they're in the middle category because they get a benefit, meaning the paid watcher gets paid and the socher gets to use the item, but they are also providing something, meaning the nosei sachar is providing the watching, and the socher is providing a monetary payment for the ability to rent the item. So they're sort of in the middle category. So nishban al hashvura, they have to swear with respect to the animal being broken, al hashvuya, or if it was a captive, meaning that if they swear that they won't be liable, val mesa. And they, or if it just died naturally, mishalmin as aveda as a gneva, but they pay if it was lost or stolen, because the animal being lost and the animal being stolen, especially since we're not talking about stolen by armed robbers, we're talking about, you did not watch it well enough. So as a result, that's why it got lost, and that's why it was stolen. And so there's a greater liability for them for these middle categories, the renter and the paid watcher, if the item that was that they're renting or watching is lost or stolen. So now those are sort of the general rules. And now the question is what happens if you swear falsely? So now we're going to go through all of those details. So Amr l'shomer chinam heichan shori. So the owner comes to the watcher and he says, "Listen, where's my ox?" And now Amrlo Mace. So we're going to do one of these categories, but then we're going to essentially list the other four categories. We'll go through them more quickly, but it doesn't make a difference which one you say. So if you say that it died naturally, now again, this is a shomer chinam, it died naturally. So all he has to do is swear that it died naturally, and then he is off the hook. So let's say he says that it died naturally. V'hu nishbar o nishba onignav of it, but one of the other four things actually was what happened to it. It was broken, it captured, stolen, or lost. Or nishbar, he says it was broken, v'husha meso o nishba o nignav o avad, and really one of the other four things happened to it. Nishba v'husha meso o nishbar o nignav o avad. So again, or he says that it was captured and one of the other four things happened to it. Nignav, it was stolen, v'husha meso nishbar o nishba o avad, and again in one of the other four things. So he's going to, as we'll see in a moment, swear falsely. Avad, or it was lost, v'husha meso nishbar o nishba o nignav. And so again, or he says it was lost when one of the other four things happened to it. And so now the owner says back, okay, so I'm going to make you swear to me. And he says, yes, I'm swearing to you. Patur, he is exempt. Now, it's not completely clear what he's exempt for. We'll talk about it in the Gemara, but the answer to the question is he's exempt from the liability that's associated with with making a watcher's oath, the custodian's oath, And those liabilities, as reflected in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, 5th parak, is a korban asham, and I think a korban asham and a 1/5 penalty. So the point is that he's not going to be liable for that, because although he swore falsely, the item that he said and what actually happened are all cases where he is exempt if in fact it were true. And so what actually happened is a situation of exemption, and what he swore to was a situation of exemption. And so as a result, the custodian's oath is not going to be put on him. Another case, so Heichan Shori, where's my ox? Amar lo, Eini yodea mas tasach. I don't know what you're talking about. So meaning lo hayu dvar molim. There was never any kind of relationship between us. V'hu shemei so nishbar o nishba o nignav o avad. And in fact, it was broken or stolen or died naturally or captured or lost. Mashpiachani, and then the person, the owner makes the guy, the watcher swear, Amar Amen, and he says yes. Patur, he's still exempt, because even though I don't know what you're talking about is in some ways more obnoxious, even the truth is still a situation where he's not going to be liable. So Heichan Shori, another case, Amar lo avad, he says it was lost. Mashpiacha ani, and then he says the owner says to swear to him. Va'amar amen, and he says yes, I'm going to swear, and he swears. Va'edim eidim oso shehachalu, and yet the witnesses now come and say that they saw this guy eat the ox himself. So mishalem is a Karen. So in that situation, he's going to need to pay the principal of it. Now here he's going to need to let's take a look in Rashi. And Rashi notes, well, it's part of the long Rashi of Nosei Sachar v'Hosocher. If we take a look, third line of the wide lines, near the towards the bottom of the page, third of the wide lines, about 6 words into the line, the shomer chinam, when it comes to a shomer chinam, hapoter atzmo b'tainas aveda. If a person says that the item was lost, einu mishalem kaf kefel af b'shvua, they are not going to be subject to the double payment, even if in fact it was stolen, and even if they swore. It's only, as we'll see in a moment, if the person says it was stolen, and then witnesses come and say that you were the one who stole it, that you'd be liable to the double penalty. So it's an odd situation that even though that your claim, that the watcher's claim, will actually affect whether or not you're going to be subject to the double penalty. Hoda me'atzmo, if he admits it himself, well then mishalom karen v'chomesh v'asham. Well then, effectively, he is subject to the admission of a custodian's oath, and the admission of a custodian's oath is the situation where you pay 1/5 and you bring an asham sacrifice. You only do those two things if you admit that you swore falsely, not if witnesses came. On the other hand, same kind of situation, but a slightly different claim by the custodian. Heichan Shori, where's my ox? We asked the unpaid watcher, Amar lo nignam, and he says it was stolen. Mashpiachani, please swear to me, Amar Main. And he says, yes, I swear to you. And then witnesses come and say that he stole it. Mishalom Tashlumi Kevel, he has to pay double. Hodo me'atzma, but if he admits it to himself, admits that he stole it himself, well, then he doesn't pay double, because the double penalty is a knas, and when you admit to something, you don't pay a knas. Misham karen v'chomesh v'asham. In that situation, you pay the principal, the 1/5 charge, and an asham. This is highlights that on some level, even though we think of the 1/5 surcharge as a penalty, it's not in the same category as other penalties, because it's only liable when you admit it. Okay. Amar le'echa b'shuk. So now we're now going to just pause for a moment and say, what about a situation where there is no watching liability in the first place. There's not a claim that somebody had a watching relationship, but rather you go to somebody in the marketplace, Heikan Shorishi Ganapti and Ganapta, and you say to them, listen, where's my ox that you stole? So as a result, there was never an allegation that this person was supposed to watch it. He didn't obtain it in a legal manner. So and hu omer lo ganavti, not surprisingly, the response is no, I didn't steal anything. And now the witnesses come and say that he did in fact steal it. Mishalem tashlumi kefel. So now he has to pay the double payment. Tavachu machar, if he in fact slaughtered it or sold it. Mishalem tashlume arba v'chamisha. Then he has to pay 4 times or 5 times. Now, although our Mishnah here says 4 times or 5 times, implying that 4 times could even apply to an ox, that's not correct. Because the difference between 4 and 5 is just whether it's an ox or a sheep. If it's a sheep, you pay 4 times. If it's an ox, you pay 5 times. And so as a result, this is the language of the Mishnah is in some ways imprecise. The point is that when it comes to oxen and sheep, the thief is going to pay 4 times or 5 times if it turns out that he slaughtered or sold it. Ra edim excuse me, shemashmishin, that if he see ubain, so he sees that witnesses are coming closer, Amar Ganavti, and he says, I stole it. So he only admits it because the witnesses were on their way. Avalo tabachti velo macharti, but I didn't actually go and slaughter or sell it. Eino mishalem ela keren. Well, in that situation, he's only going to be liable for the principal. He's not going to be liable for the double penalty. And Rashi adds, let's take a look at Rashi. Ra edim shemashmishin ubayin, that you see witnesses coming closer. Rebusa ashmi'inan. We're teaching something extra. Ta'aval gaf demachmas biyusasa biyasusa to edim od, that it's only because he sees the witnesses coming that he admits v'chayev atzmo b'keren, and he makes himself liable for the principal. Kisha amar ganavti, when he says that he did in fact steal it. Afilu haki, nonetheless, Havya Hoda. This constitutes an admission. The niftar mina kefel, and you're not subject to paying double. The kevan de'ein kan kefel. And now, once there is no double payment, pater af min atficha. Even if you were to have slaughtered it or sold it, you're also going to shekafar, which you denied, but which he denied. Ubo edim sheganbo v'tavach, and now umachar, and now the witnesses come and say, actually, he stole it and he slaughtered it and sold it, well, then you're not going to be liable for the 4 times and 5 times, because the kol heka de leka kefel, whenever you don't have a double leka chiyuv tvicha, there's no additional liability associated with slaughtering it. Kida amrinan hasam, as we saw back in Baba Kama. Tashlumi arba v'chamisha. In fact, we saw this language also here in Masechah Shevuot as well, if I remember correctly. Tashlumi arba v'chamisha, that when it comes to slaughtering and selling an ox or a sheep, we say that you're liable 4 times and 5 times, and the Torah refers to 4 times and 5 times, and it says Tashlumi arba v'chamisha amar Rachmana. The Torah specifically it says 4 and 5. Below Tashlumi shlosho v'arba, not 3 and 4. And if you take away one of the multiples because you're not liable for having the double payment of having stolen it, then you're not going to have we're not going to result in you having a 4-time or 5-time payment, because you now are down to 3 and 4. The Torah never mentions 3 and 4. So as a result, that's not going to be a penalty that you're going to have to pay. The kaven to kefa leka, butzer leichad. You end up only owing 1 time. So that is that's what Rashi highlights. So again, it highlights the importance of admitting when somebody does something wrong. This is not just a good advice in connection with a thief. It's good advice generally. Okay, so so we did that little aside about accusing somebody in the marketplace, but now we get back to people who have some sense of responsibility. So we began with a unpaid watcher. We now go to the other extreme and talk about the borrower. Amar LaShoel, you say to a borrower, Heichan Shori, where is my ox? Amar Lo, and the response is, as we turn to Memtedim a bet, Mace, that it died naturally. And again, if that's something for which he will be liable, because again, a borrower is pretty much liable for everything. So v'hushin nishbar o nishba o nignav o avad, and again, just like in the first case, it didn't die naturally. It was actually broken or captured or stolen or lost. Or he says nishbar, the borrower responds that it was broken. V'hushin meso nishba o nignav o avad, and in fact, one of the other four things happened to it. Again, the other four things being captured, stolen, die naturally, captured, stolen, or lost. Nishba, it was the borrower says it was captured. V'husha meso nishbaro nignavo oven, and one of the other four things happened. Nigna v'husha meso nishbaro nishba o avad, and again one of the other four things happened. Avad v'husha mesa o nishbar o nishba o nignav. So again, in any of the five claims, you make any of those five claims, namely, you claim that it died naturally, or you claim that it was broken, or you claim that it was captured, or you claim that it was stolen, or you claim that it was lost, all of which a borrower is going to be liable for. And in fact, it was not any of those five things, but it was one of the it was not one of the five things that you mentioned, but it was one of the other four of those five things. Then mashpiachani, and the owner says to the borrower that you need to swear, Amar Amen, and he says, yes, I'm going to swear, and that I'm swearing, patur, the borrower is exempt, because again, his oath did not change his status. He in fact is liable based on what he said, and what actually happened would result in his regular liability. So that's going to be the story, not going to be subject to, and again, and in this case also, we'll talk about it in the Gemara, it's not going to be subject to an asham offering or a 1/5 penalty. So next case, Heichan Shori, where's my ox? You again ask the borrower. Amar Lo, and the borrower says, Eini yodea ma tasach. Now I don't know what you're talking about. Well, that's obviously a total different situation. For a borrower, if the borrower says he doesn't know what you're talking about, then you're going to be not liable because you didn't do anything. So he's not admitting to liability. And now v'husha mezo nishbar o nishba o nignav o nevad. And in fact, one of the five things did happen to it, and so he is liable. Mashpiachani, and then he's asked to swear, v'amar amen, and he agrees to swear, and he swears. Chayav, he's going to be liable specifically for having for having he's going to be liable for the asham offering and for the 1/5 penalty. So Amar Lano say Sachar Vasocher, last grouping, right? The two categories of a paid watcher and a renter. Heichan Shori, and you need to ask them, where's my ox? Amar Lo. Now again, with this middle category, they are only going to be exempt with three situations. If it's mace, nishbar, o nishba, meaning it's got to be where it died, it broke, or it was captured, because those are situations that are beyond a person's control. And so as a result, there's going to be no liability in those situations. So if you ask a paid watcher or a renter, where's my ox? And he says, Amar Lo mace, v'hu nishbar o nishba, and in fact it was broken or captured, or nishbar, v'hu shemes o nishba, nishba, v'hu shemes o nishbar. So again, he claims one of the three ways that he's exempt, and in fact he's lying about it, but it's one of the other two where he would also be exempt, is what the truth is. Or nignav v'husha avad, or he says that it was stolen, but in fact it was lost, and of course in those situations he's liable. Avad v'husha nignav, or he says it was lost and in fact it was stolen. And again, in both those situations, he's going to be liable. So he's mashpiach ani, and he's asked to swear v'amar amen, and now he swears. In all those situations, he's either sworn falsely where he was going to be not liable anyway, or he's sworn falsely where he's going to be liable anyway. Patur. That in all those cases, he's going to be exempt. So that is the next category, and so wrote something wrong in my notes because not okay. All right, because he's not changing his liability with respect to what he's swearing. On the other hand, if he says meis o nishbar o nishba, he says it was either died naturally, broken, or captured. But in fact, it was stolen or lost, so he's liable. Mashpiacha ani, and then he's asked to swear. And he agrees to swear. Chayav. Now he is going to be liable because what he was swearing to got him off the hook, but the truth what made him liable. Avad onignav, if in fact it was lost or stolen, and I'm sorry, that's what he says, that it was lost or it was stolen. So oddly, it says something that makes him liable, but in fact, if the truth were known, he would not have been liable. Mashbiach ani, and the person asks him to swear, v'amar amen, and he says, yes, I'm swearing, patur, then he's exempt because the oath that he made him actually more liable and not less liable. And so as a result, that's why he's going to not be subject to bringing an asham and bringing and paying a 1/5 penalty. Okay, now zehaklal, we are in the fourth of the medium wide lines on Memtet Amud Bet. So this is the general rule. Kol hamishana mechova lechova. If you change your situation as a result of what you're swearing to from one of liability to another of liability, umi pater lepater, or from one of exemption to another exemption, umi patur lechova, or from one exemption to an obligation to being liable, as we saw in this last case, patur. Then you are exempt from bringing an asham and from paying the 1/5 penalty. Mechova leptur. However, if you would have been liable and now you swear to something that makes you exempt, chayav, then you're going to be liable. Ze'aklal. Kol anishba lahakel al atzmo chayav. If you make things better for yourself, you're going to be liable. Lahachmir al atzmo pater. But if you make things worse for yourself, you're going to be exempt. So
the Mishnah could have just said that last line.
Yeah, the Rishonim deal with that. I have not. My understanding is that there are many who say that the text should not have included both the zehaklals, and that's probably what makes the most sense to me in terms of understanding this situation. You can see if you take a look at the little aleph at the Masoras HaShas. The Masoras HaShas suggests that the first zaklal, which in some ways is the more clear one, is not in it looks like in the Yerushalmi lo garas haklal chulu archayev. So that's just interesting to note that clearer language isn't in the Yerushalmi, and so maybe it could be that that it was just zaklal kol nishba lahakel al atzmo chayev lahachmer al atzmo pater. The question then, of course, says, and certain, is how do we then understand the case where you aren't being more lenient or being strict, does that mean that it's you're putter or not? And the answer in the end is, of course, you are putter, and that may be why the whoever was that added the language of zaklal, the first zaklal, did so to make it clearer. But in any event, that's probably the most likely explanation for why we have both of these rules, when in fact it seems like one of them would be sufficient. Okay, so let's now take a look at the final Gemara on of Masechah Shavuos. So Mantana Arba Shomrim, who is the author of this Mishnah that talks about 4 kinds of custodians? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua, Rebbe Meir. It's Rebbe Meir. Now, of course, on some level, it's a Stam Mishnah, and a Stam Mishnah is often Rebbe Meir. But we will see that there's a reason to be concerned that maybe it wouldn't be Rebbe Meir. So Amar Le Rav Rav Nachman, Mi Ikatana de Leisle Arba Shomrim. What do you mean? Who's the author of our Mishnah who says that there are 4 watchers? Everybody agrees that there are 4 kinds of custodians. There's a renter, a paid watcher, an unpaid watcher, and a borrower. Those 4 custodians. Nobody's disagreeing with that. So Amar Le, Rav Nachman clarified, this is what I'm trying to say. Man tana de Amar socher kanose sachar tami. Who is it that says that a renter is like a paid watcher, right? We combined in our Mishnah those 2 and said that the same rules applies to both of them. And Amar Rabba Baravua, and it's about that Rabba Baravua said, Rebbe Meir, it's Rebbe Meir. One second, Rebbe Meir ibcha shamin unlike. But one second, we have a brisa, although it says ditnan in our Gemara. If you take a look at the bet in Mesoras Hashas, you'll see that it actually they changed the language to the Tanya, because this is actually a brisa, not a Mishnah. Socher, when it comes to a renter, Ketza Mishalim, how do they pay? Rebbe Meir Omer Kashomer Chinam. Rebbe Meir says that a renter is like an unpaid watcher, meaning when he's paying a full rental fee. So as a result, he's buying effectively his lack of responsibility. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, Kenosi Sachar. No, it's like a paid watcher. There's stuff going in both directions. And so as a result, we should treat him like a paid watcher. And so doesn't that show that it's, and again, Rebbe Meir's the one who says that it's like an unpaid watcher, but our Mishnah says he's like a paid watcher. So our Mishnah is like Rebbe Yehuda in this brisa. So the answer is so doesn't that show a contradiction with everything we've been saying? So Rabba Baravua Ibchatani, Rabba Baravua taught the opposite way. He taught that it was Rebbe Meir who says that the person is like that the renter is like a paid watcher, and it's Rebbe Yehuda who says that he's like an unpaid watcher. And so now our Mishnah fits like Rebbe Meir. Okay, so honey arba havu shlosha havu. I don't understand. We've been saying that there are 4 watchers, but really there are just 3 categories, because after all, there are, oh, 1 second. Sorry for not scrolling. There are just 3 categories. And Rashi points out, if we take a look last of the wide lines in Rashi, Haki Garcinan Havi Hani Gimel Shlosha Havi Garcinan Velo Garcinan Ihaki. We're not going to add the words Ihaki in the Gemara, which we don't have. But this is the point that I wanted to raise. Ubein the Rebbe Meir, Ubein the Rebbe Yehuda, Parchinanlah. This is a question according to both Rebbe Meir and Rebbe Yehuda, because in the end, whether you're Rebbe Meir and you combine as per Rabba Baravua, you combine a renter with a paid watcher, or you're Rebbe Yehuda who combines the renter, according to Rabba Baravua, who combines the renter with an unpaid watcher. Parchinanlah, we can ask this question because you've combined 2 of the categories. So really, there are just 3 categories. So the answer that you might expect, Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Arba Shomrim V'dinehen Shlosha. No, there are 4 kinds of watchers, but meaning 4 kinds of custodians, but there are 3 laws that apply to them. And so that's not, when we say 4 custodians, we don't mean that there are 4 categories of laws, but rather 4 categories of custodians, because even though the renter is combined with either the paid watcher or the unpaid watcher, it's still, those are 2 different kinds of categories. And so we're going to count them as separate situations. Okay, so Amar Lashomer Chinam. So we quoted in our Mishnah Hechan Shori, and we Amar LeEchad B'Shuk, and then we said, if you said to somebody in the market Amar Lashomer Hechan Shori, and then if you said to this a paid watcher, where's my ox? An Amar Lo, and we said Eini Yodea Ma Tasach, and I don't know what you're talking about. So Amar Rav. So now this is just basically that was just to sort of requote the relevant piece of our Mishnah, but the bottom line is that our Mishnah is now going to sort of go through debate regarding the scope of when we say that you're exempt, because we said in numerous cases patur. So what exactly are you patur from? We said at a baseline that you're patur from the asham and the payment of the 1/5 penalty. Those are the liability that you would have if you swore the custodian's oath falsely. If you swore this custodian's oath falsely, but is that the only thing you're exempt from, or are you exempt from all violations associated with oaths? So that's going to be a debate between Rav and Shmuel. So Amar Rav says, the Kulan Patura Mishvuas Shomrim. What we're saying you're not liable for is when it comes to the oath of a watcher. But you would be liable Mishum Shvuas Bitoy, because you took an oath, Shvuas Bitoy, an oath of utterance. You swore either that you were going to do something and you didn't do something, you weren't going to do something and you did it, or or you did something and you didn't do it, or you didn't do something and you did do it, right? Those are what we came up with at the very beginning of our Maseches. In some ways, this brings us to the very beginning of our Maseches, noting the fact that there are 4 kinds of oaths. But the bottom line is that Rav says that you're going to be liable because what did you say? You said that you swore to something about the past that was false, and so as a result, you are going to be liable for a false shvuas bituy, and that is subject to a korban olav yored. And so that's going to be your punishment. Ushmuel Amar, but Shmuel says, no, you're even not liable for the oath of utterance. So why not? But my committee, what are they arguing about? Shmuel Savar Lesa Bilahaba. Shmuel says that in order for an oath to be subject to a shvuas bitoy penalty, it needs to have the possibility of being an oath that you can make about the future. So as a result, here, the person swearing that the animal died, but you cannot swear. It would not be a shvuas bitoy to swear about the future that the animal will die. That would, in fact, be a shvuas shav. So, and therefore, as Rashi puts it, right, we take a look at Rashi, Lesa bilahaba, yamot, right, below yamut, that it's going to die or it's not going to die. Shivzu shvuas shav. This is a vain oath. He she'ein biyado l'kayim, because the person himself doesn't have the ability to fulfill that oath. Because even if they kill the animal, that would not be the fulfillment of the oath, because and he says that it's going to die. It's not a fulfillment of the oath, because the point is that they're saying that it died of natural causes. So you can't fulfill that. So the Rav Savar, and so as a result, because you can't swear about the same thing in the future, it doesn't, the law of shvuas bitoy doesn't apply according to Shmuel. The Rav Savar Isay B'Lavahein. No, Rav says you don't need to have a future element to it. As long as you can swear the positive and the negative, as both of them are possible, then that's going to be subject to the shvuas bitoy. You can swear whether you did die or it didn't die, and therefore that's going to be a shvuas bitoy. Now, 1 second. We already saw Rav and Shmuel argue about this. Because we have the following. This guy, person X threw a pebble into the sea. Zarak, or he swore that that X did not throw a pebble into the sea. Rav Amar Chayev. Rav says that you're liable for making a Shavuos Bitoy. Ushmuel Amar Putter. And the reason is that Shmuel says you're Putter is because you can't swear about it in the future. You can't swear that X is going to do something. That would be a Shavuos Shav because you don't have the power within your ability to make it happen. So as a result, that isn't a valid Shavuos Bitoy. And so as a result, you're not going to be liable for that. Rav Amar Chayev del Isa B'Lavahain, again, because you can do positive and negative. Shmuel Amar Padzer del Isa B'Lava, because you can't swear about the future. So why do I need to be taught both of these times, both here in connection with our Gemara and back earlier in the Masechet in connection with the pebble case? So Trika, we actually need to be taught both times. Because if we only taught in the rule by the pebble, or Rav, maybe it would only be there that Rav says that you're going to be liable for the Shavuos Bitoy, because there the person is choosing to swear on his own. No court has forced him to swear. In our case, in our Mishnah, he is being forced to swear. It's the court that's forcing him to swear. So maybe he would agree to Shmuel that when a court forces an oath, then it's not going to be subject to Shavuos Bitoy. Kid Rabbi Ami, as Rabbi Ami says, Rabbi Ami, Kol Shavuos any oath that the judges force somebody to swear, you're not going to be subject to Shavuos Bitoy as a result. And so, as a result, that seems to, it could be that we say that way. And therefore, we also tell the machlokas here in order to tell us that Rav actually does not hold like Rabbi Ami. And he holds that even in a case where a judge does administer an oath, it can be a Shavuos Bitoy. And if we only had the case in our Mishnah, Bahakam or Shmuel, maybe it's only here that Shmuel says, because a court is forcing the person to swear, that you were going to say that there's no liability for Shavuos Bitoy. Aval Bahach, in the case of the pebble, Ema Modale L'Rav, maybe he would agree to Rav that you would be liable. And so therefore, Tzricha, that's why we need to tell us that they argue in both cases. So now let's take a quick look at Rabbi Ami's opinion. Gufa, Rabbi Ami, Kol Shvusha Dayanin Mashbianosa, that when it says that and when an oath is administered by judges, so then you're not going to be subject to the oath of utterance. Why? That's the reason that we're now re-quoting that language. Shnei Amar, because the Torah says, O nefesh kisi shava levate b'svasayim, that if a person will swear expressing with his lips. So what is the implication of kisi shava? If he's going to, meaning that is not doing it automatically, he's doing it voluntarily. Me'atzmo, it implies that he's doing it on his own. And so as a result, if a court requires him to swear, well, then the pasuk doesn't apply, and it's not going to be a Shavuos Bitoy. Reish Lakish. And this understanding of the word ki is like Reish Lakish. The Amar Reish Lakish, ki, the word ki, mishtamish ba'arba lashonos. It can be used for 4 different purposes. It can be used perhaps, dilma, if, dilma, perhaps, ella, but, daha, or because. And so the point is not that if it's not a because or a that, meaning it's not saying that that whatever the circumstances are in which a person swears with the expression of his lips, but rather it's an if. So it's only an if, meaning that it's a voluntary action. And so as a result, that's how how Rabbi Ami understands the pasuk, and that is why Rabbi Ami says that actually this if a court imposes a shvua, it cannot be a Shavuos Bitoy. Okay, let's close us out. So how do we paskin? So Rabbi Lazar Omer, kulan peturim mishvuas shomrin v'chayavin mishum shvuas bitoy. That again, when it comes to our Mishnah, when it says that you're putter, you're going to be putter from a shvuas shomrim, the oath of watchers, v'chayavin mishum shvuas bitoy, and you're going to be liable because of the oath of utterance, exactly like Rav says. So now, and then he adds the following. So what are the situations where you're going to be liable? Now, in fact, our Mishnah says chayev, but what Rashi points out in these two situations is that the Mishnah didn't tell you what you're chayev, even though in other situations in our Mishnah, in our long Mishnah at the beginning of this parak, which we learned at the beginning of today, because this is the one-day parak, that if in fact in some of the circumstances it said that you're going to be liable, but it didn't say exactly what you're going to be liable. And so what he's saying now is these are the cases where you're going to be liable, that if in fact you say, I don't know what you're talking about, and you swear to that, and then you confess, or or you swear to the fact that it was a theft, I'm sorry, or it was actually a theft or a loss, but you swore to the fact that it was either a death by natural causes, or it was broke, or it became captive. In all of those situations, shehu chayev. There you're going to be liable, shaharei kfaro b'mamon, because you were in the process of denying money, and so as a result, you're going to be liable. So let's take a look at the last two Rashis, and with that, we'll conclude. The second to last Rashi is about 12 lines up. Rabbi Elazar Omer Kulan Hanach Peturin. All the times where we say Pater de Masnisin in the Mishnah, Peturim Mishvuas Shomrim, you're going to be not liable according to the oath of watchers. But you are going to be liable for swearing falsely because you swore falsely about the past. The Rabbi Elazar Sfira Le Karav, because Rabbi Elazar agrees with Rab. Chutz me'eni yodea ma'at hasach to Shoel ugeneva. I'm sorry, to Shoel ugeneva v'aveda sheshomer sachar v'socher. That again, if you say you don't know what it's talking about, and then turns out that you one of the liabilities is subject is what actually happened and you're a borrower, or it's you say that one of the other ways that you're not liable for a paid watcher or an unpaid watcher, and in fact it was stolen or lost. The Ketani Behuba Masnisin Chayev, that in our Mishnah it says that you're liable. Hahu Chayev B'Shvuas Shomrim, and that reference to chayev is a reference to being liable for an oath of watchers. Shaharei kfaro b'mamon, because you effectively said that you, when in your denial, you said that you were not going to be liable for money. Ubahi deshomer chinam shetan avad v'hu achlo. And but why didn't we mention right now the reference to the fact that if an unpaid watcher says that it was lost, and in fact, it turns out that he aided himself, or the situation where he says that it was stolen, but in fact, it turned out that he himself stole it, where again, in those situations, you're also going to be liable because you were kofar mammon. So why didn't Rabbi Elazar mention those in our Gemara here? The Ketani ba Masnisin, there our Mishnah said specifically, Hoda me'atzmo, if he admits it himself, mishalem keren v'chomish, he's going to be liable for the principal plus a fifth penalty, v'asham, and he's going to be liable for an asham. So as a result, lo itzrika leila Rabbi Elazar. So that's why Rabbi Elazar didn't need to reference those here. Lemimin ninhu, to count them out, to list them here. Gabi hanach, among these, chutz daha behedya perish lehu tana chomesh v'asham d'shuas shomer. And so as a result, he's listing these because those were the ones where the Tana did not specifically say that you were going to be liable. So Hadron Allah Arba Shomrim, Beslika Allah, Masech Shvuos, Hadron Allah Arba Shomrim, Beslika Allah, Masech Shvuos, Hadron Allah, Arba Shomrim, Uslicha Allah, Masech Shvuos. We are now finished with Masech Shvuos. Stay tuned. Oh, sorry for not scrolling. Stay tuned, because tomorrow we begin Masechet Avodah Zarah. I'm going to try to remember not to say ever that we begin Avodah Zarah or something like that, because that would be terrible. We have to say Masechet Avodah Zarah. So, God willing, tomorrow we begin Masechet Avodah Zarah. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. It's wonderful to accomplish so much by doing a little bit every day. Have
Yasher koach.
Yes, Mazel Tov.
Mazal
Mazel
tov.
Tov.